You who sit before me tonight, in this dim and trembling hour of the world, feel the quiet that precedes a great severing. It is not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of endings, the soft, nearly imperceptible rupture between the life you have lived and the life that now insists on being born. I speak to you from the threshold I have inhabited for many years, a place where the dead and the living exchange their subtle breath, where time folds upon itself like a serpent returning to its own tail. And from this threshold I have watched the cords that bind human beings to their old attachments fray, thin, and finally dissolve. The soul, in its ancient wisdom, has decided it no longer consents to carry what has long since died. It no longer tolerates the brittle masks of sentiment, loyalty, guilt, and fear. It no longer kneels before the altars of outdated inner gods. This is the final cord-cutting phase, and it is more than a psychological event. It is an epochal turning, a tectonic shift in the collective unconscious, a dark glimmer of the aeon changing its face. You feel it not as an idea, but as a weight in the chest, a heaviness behind the eyes, an exhaustion of pretending to be the person the past needed you to be. The old attachments, whether to people, identities, wounds, or dreams, have been quietly decaying beneath the surface of your awareness. For years they clung to you like vines around the trunk of a weakening tree, whispering their familiar stories, but the soul refuses now. It is done with repetition. It is done with circular suffering. It is done with the illusions that once gave you warmth, but now imprison you like dimly lit chambers of memory. And because the soul is done, your conscious self must face the dissolution. The ego trembles, for it cannot imagine life without what it has used to define itself. Yet the soul is not interested in the ego's comfort. It is interested only in truth. You stand, therefore, at the precipice of death, not the death of the body, but the death of the architecture of selfhood you have carried since childhood. And it is always childhood where these cords were first tied. Every promise to be good, every attempt to be loved, every compromise you made to survive the demands of the world became a binding thread. Over years, these threads grew into ropes, and the ropes into chains. And now, in the dim light of this late hour of the aeon, your soul has lifted a small, trembling blade. It no longer asks you to cut, it demands it, and the demand arrives with a strange, ghost-like stillness. When I lived through the visions that later became the Red Book, I learned that the psyche does not move according to the calendar of men, but to the calendar of gods. When the god within turns his face away from an old pattern, that pattern withers, no matter how fiercely the ego clings. In this final phase, the god has already departed from your old attachments. They will not return. The energy that once animated them has vanished into deeper strata of the unconscious. You may try to revive them with nostalgia or memory, but they will remain cold, unresponsive, like corpses too long preserved. The living soul refuses to embrace what is lifeless. It is difficult for the ego, for it experiences this as abandonment. You tell yourself, I should hold on, I must repair, I must try again. But this is a lie trained into you by years of conditioning. The truth is that what is ending because the self, your innermost, eternal center, has already moved beyond these attachments. Individuation does not negotiate with what is false. It simply burns away what is no longer essential. And now the fire has begun to rise. Listen closely to the silence between my words. It is the same silence that intrudes upon your days now, the same void that presses against your heart when you lie awake at night. This silence is the voice of the self calling you away from your old life. You try to interpret it as loneliness or failure, but it is neither. It is the cosmic summons that every seeker eventually hears. It is the whisper that says, you are no longer permitted to remain who you once were. The time of shedding has arrived. When a cord is cut, the first sensation is disorientation. You feel as though you are walking without gravity, without meaning, without a guiding thread. But meaning is not found in what dies. Meaning is found in the mystery that unfolds after death. The ego fears this mystery, for it cannot control it, but you must surrender to it as one surrenders to nightfall, trusting that dawn will come even if you cannot yet imagine its light. Many of you here are experiencing a strange inner dying. Relationships you once held sacred now feel hollow. Roles you performed dutifully now feel impossible. Dreams you once chased now taste of ash. It is tempting to interpret this as personal failure, but you must understand, this is the psyche's revolt against everything that delays your individuation. The self is pulling you inward, deeper, towards the core of your being. It cannot tolerate attachments that distract you from this descent. The great separation, an event I sensed many decades before you were born, is not merely external. It is occurring within individuals as the collective unconscious rearranges its architecture. The old gods, the old myths, the old complexes are losing their power. They crumble like ancient temples overtaken by moss, and their collapse leaves a terrifying emptiness. But this emptiness is sacred. It is the birthplace of a new form of consciousness. You feel isolated, not because you have failed, but because you are being extracted from what no longer aligns with the direction of your unfolding. The cords that bind you to your old stories are dissolving, and so the stories themselves lose their color. You wake each day with a faint sense of betrayal, as though the world you once knew has turned its face away. But this is not betrayal. It is liberation. The soul does not abandon you. It releases you. There will be moments in this final cord-cutting phase when you feel the ghost of your past tugging at your sleeve. You may dream of people who once shaped your destiny. You may feel sudden waves of grief, longing, or regret. These are not signs to return. They are the psyche's way of gathering the last fragments of what must be integrated before it disappears into the underworld of memory. Do not try to resurrect the dead. Do not attempt to give breath to what the self has declared complete. Allow the dead to remain in their own realm, you must remain in yours. In my final years at Bollingen, I often heard the lake whispering in the darkness, a sound like the inhaling breath of the world. It was through this sound that I understood the deeper truth of detachment, that the soul is not interested in possession, but in transformation. The attachments you have lost were not taken from you, they were completed, and the self does not hold on to what is complete. It moves onward. To walk the path of individuation is to accept the necessity of this movement. It is to understand that every attachment must one day be severed so that the essence of your being may emerge from beneath the rubble of your former selves. You have lived many small lives within this lifetime, each bound by its own set of hopes and fears. But now those small lives collapse into a single point of dissolution. Everything narrows to a threshold, and the threshold demands passage. The death of the old self is not gentle. It drags you through memories you would rather avoid, through long corridors of grief, through visions that unsettle your waking mind. But this descent is not punishment. It is purification. The soul cannot rise unless the weight of the past is lifted from it. And so the dissolution continues, chord by chord, attachment by attachment, identity by identity. What remains after the cutting is not emptiness, but space vast, luminous space, a space that has waited patiently for you to return to it. This is the inner sanctuary where the self resides. But to enter it fully, you must allow every attachment that does not serve your transformation to fall away like leaves in a final autumn. You are not losing your life, you are shedding its husk, and the husk must fall away if the seed within you is to awaken. The soul has already chosen. Now you must choose as well. And now, as we descend further into this dark interior where the final severing prepares itself, I must tell you something that the ego resists with all its might. Every cord you cut exposes you to the shadow that tied it. You cannot release an attachment without meeting the figure who lived behind it. The shadow has always been the hidden author of your bonds, those compulsions you mistook for love, those loyalties you mistook for virtue, those sacrifices you mistook for destiny. Behind each one stands a face you refuse to see, a face too ancient, too wounded, too powerful for your waking mind to acknowledge. But this phase of cutting, the final one, permits no more blindness. The shadow rises because it must be named. The ego trembles because it must be broken open. You have entered a corridor where light does not reach. It is not a punishment. It is initiation. No one who seeks true liberation can avoid this descent. The cord cutting of the soul is not the gentle untying of knots. It is the ripping away of illusion. And illusions resist death. They scream, they cling, they whisper their old promises into your ear. But beneath their trembling hands stands the shadow, waiting. Individuation demands that you face this figure without turning away. This is the great paradox. To become whole, you must confront the very forces within you that once sustained fragmentation. You must stand before the part of yourself that has shaped your fears. manipulated your longings, forged your attachments, and fed upon your insecurities. The shadow is not simply darkness, it is the rejected life of your soul. Every cord cut is a summons to reclaim what you abandoned in order to survive. As these final cords loosen, many of you feel a strange panic, a sense that something monstrous is approaching. That feeling is correct, but the monster is not your enemy. It is the truth you have feared. The shadow is the guardian of rebirth. To confront it is to cross the threshold into the deeper layers of the self. Without this confrontation, you remain tethered to your past, repeating its cycles as if imprisoned in the labyrinth of old patterns. The great separation unfolding in these years is not only a cosmic event, it is the psychic demand that humanity finally face its shadow collectively and individually. In my visions, long before this hour of your world, I saw a figure emerging from the depths of the unconscious, a vast, formless presence that carried the weight of centuries of repression. Humanity has scattered its shadow across time, across cultures, across families, across the quiet corners of its own psyche. Now, as the aeon shifts, as the archetypal currents rearrange themselves, the shadow returns in full force. It demands recognition. It demands integration. It demands the end of denial. Your personal attachments, the ones you are now losing, were often defenses against this encounter. You clung to others so you would not have to meet yourself. You held on to roles, relationships, identities, and wounds because they distracted you from the abyss within. But those distractions have expired, and without them, you feel the gravitational pull of the inner depths. You feel the shadow moving beneath your ribs. You feel the old fears shaking awake like ancient animals. This is why individuation is painful, because it strips away the comforting masks that allowed you to avoid yourself. It forces you to witness everything you exiled. It demands that you grieve what you once believed was you. And grief is the soul's alchemy. Through grief, the ego dissolves and the raw material of your being is exposed, malleable, sacred. Only then can the self reshape you. Do not fear the grief that now rises as these cords break. It is holy. It is the blood of transformation. It washes away the debris of former lives. The attachments you are losing are not being taken from you. They are being returned to the underworld so that their energies may be purified and reintegrated. But first you must enter that underworld. This descent is not metaphorical. Many of you feel it physically, the weight, the dizziness, the sense of falling inward into a labyrinth with no map. But labyrinths are not prisons, they are wombs. The shadow is the midwife. It forces you into the depths so that you may rise uncontaminated by illusion. And what of the archetypes involved in this final severing? They gather like silent constellations around you. There is the destroyer, an archetype feared because it brings endings, yet without the destroyer, nothing new can emerge. It is this force that now severs the final cords. It cuts not out of malice, but out of necessity. It knows what must die for the self to breathe. There is the wounded child, the fragment of you that learned love through pain, attachment through fear, identity through sacrifice. It clings to the cords longest. It begs you not to cut them. It promises that what is familiar is safer than what is true. But this is a lie learned long ago. And now the wounded child must be integrated, not obeyed. There is the anima, or animus, the inner opposite, calling you toward balance through the dissolution of attachments that distort your wholeness. Many of the cords you cut are tied to projections you placed upon others. Now the psyche reclaims them. As they return, your vision clears. You see others not as symbols of your longing, but as beings on their own path. When projection collapses, love becomes real. There is the old wise one, the archetypal guide who whispers in your dreams, urging you to keep walking even when darkness thickens. This figure holds the lamp that reveals the path ahead. Even if only an inch at a time, trust this presence. It speaks from beyond your conscious mind. And there is death, an archetype misunderstood as an ending when it is in truth a threshold. It stands silently behind you now, not to take your life, but to take your former selves. It is death who collects the discarded identities, the collapsed attachments, the fragments of ego that no longer serve you. Death is the custodian of transformation. When death walks beside you, rebirth is near. As these archetypes gather, the psychic tension intensifies. This is why the final cord-cutting phase feels like a storm moving through your inner world. The winds tear apart your illusions. The waves drag you into the depths, but storms are the psyche's way of cleansing the landscape. After the storm, the air is clear. You must understand that the pain you feel now is not a regression. It is not a collapse. It is the sign that individuation is working. Pain is the psychic fire that burns through the final resistances of the ego. Without pain, nothing is released. Without release, nothing is transformed. Without transformation, nothing becomes whole. Many of you want to turn back. You feel the urge to return to the familiar, to reclaim attachments that once comforted you, but you cannot return. The door behind you has closed. The cords are too weak to reattach. The past is dissolving into mist. You must walk forward. Even if forward feels like falling, this confrontation with the shadow is the heart of individuation. It is where the false self dies. It is where the true self begins to breathe. But this beginning requires that you stand in complete honesty with yourself, seeing without distortion who you have been and who you must now become. Individuation demands sacrifice, not the sacrifice of morality or goodness, but the sacrifice of illusion. You must relinquish the fantasy that others will complete you. You must relinquish the belief that suffering is your currency for love. You must relinquish the identity built from pleasing, rescuing, performing, or carrying others. These identities were necessary once, but now they imprison you. And your soul is done with prisons. Feel the truth in this. The soul does not cut cords to punish you. It cuts them to free you. And freedom is terrifying only to the ego, never to the self. The self rejoices as each cord dissolves. It expands, it breathes, it rises. This rising is subtle at first, a new awareness, a new spaciousness, a strange sense of standing on the edge of something vast and unnamed. You feel both smaller and larger than before. You feel stripped, but you also feel closer to something eternal within you. This is the first touch of the self emerging. But before the self can rise fully, the shadow must be embraced. You cannot skip this part. You cannot leap over your own darkness. You must walk through it, barefoot, unshielded, honest. The shadow will not harm you. It will only show you what you have hidden, and once seen, it loses its power. This is the task of this phase. This is the price of liberation, to face yourself without turning away. And when you do, the cords fall silently to the ground. And now we arrive at the precipice where your individual transformation touches the vast, trembling threshold of the world itself. For what you are experiencing within your psyche is not separate from what humanity now undergoes collectively. The years 2025 and 2026 mark a psychic fracture, a tearing in the deep strata of the collective unconscious, a point where the old structures of meaning can no longer support the weight of human evolution. Long before these years arrived, I saw them in visions as a distant horizon where two currents of time converged and split, like a great river dividing into paths that would never meet again. I understood then what I can say plainly to you now. The great separation is not merely an outer crisis. It is the final sorting of souls according to their level of inner development. And each cord you cut prepares you for this crossing. In the visions that accompanied my later years, I saw humanity standing in a vast twilight, suspended between two eras. Behind them lay the old aeon dominated by fear, conquest, projection, and the splitting of the psyche. Ahead lay a new aeon, though its form was still inchoate, like a figure concealed behind the fog of dream. Between these two stood a narrow passage, illuminated only by the faint glow of individual consciousness. And across this passage, each soul was required to walk alone. This is what you feel now as isolation, heaviness, dissolution, the loss of the psychic scaffolding that once held your world together. When a collective enters such a turning point, the images that rise from the unconscious become prophetic. They do not describe events in the outer world so much as they reveal the psychic demands placed upon humanity. In dreams, visions, and archetypal eruptions, the psyche attempts to prepare individuals for what their ego cannot comprehend. Many of you have been dreaming intensely in recent months, dreams of doors closing, of bridges collapsing, of houses crumbling, of strangers pulling you forward while familiar figures turn away. These dreams are not random. They are the psyche rehearsing the severing that must occur. They are the symbolic enactments of the cord cutting your soul now performs. You may dream of water rising, swallowing old landscapes. This signifies the unconscious flooding the structures of your former identity. You may dream of fire-consuming rooms you once lived in. This is the fire of individuation, burning away what no longer holds truth. You may dream of being pursued by dark figures. These are your unintegrated complexes demanding recognition, and you may dream of walking alone at the edge of cliffs or deserts. These are the terrains of the new aeon, the landscapes of pure potential, where the self waits to emerge. The psychic collapse you feel is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that the old archetypal order is disintegrating. This must occur before a new order can be constellated. When the God image of an era dies, humanity experiences profound turmoil, both individually and collectively. The collapse of old beliefs, old identities, old attachments is merely the outer expression of a deeper metaphysical shift. In 2025, 2026, the collective unconscious undergoes such a death. The God that ruled the previous aeon, the God of hierarchy, dominance, projection, and duality is fading. As this God image dissolves, the structures built around it also fall. Institutions, relationships, and identities that depended upon this archetypal foundation weaken. The cords held by these outdated energies break, and the breaking reverberates through your psyche. You feel it as the sudden inability to tolerate what once seemed acceptable. You feel it as the urge to withdraw from noise, conflict, and superficiality. You feel it as exhaustion with roles you once performed effortlessly. This is not depression, it is psychic reorientation. The soul is withdrawing energy from everything that belongs to the old aeon, because it must redirect this energy toward the self. Some of you experience sudden clarity moments where you glimpse the emptiness in the lives around you, the hollowness of cultural values, the frantic avoidance of inner life. In such moments, you feel separated from the world, as if standing behind an invisible veil. This is not alienation. It is the beginning of differentiation. Individuation always begins by stepping out of the collective trance, and yet, as this clarity emerges, so too does sorrow. Sorrow for the selves you once were, sorrow for the people you must leave behind, sorrow for the worlds that crumble as you walk forward. This sorrow is the river that carries you into the great separation. Let it flow. It cleanses you of residues from the old aeon. You must understand that the collapse you feel inwardly is synchronous with the collapse unfolding outwardly. As the collective psyche reorganizes itself, the individuals attuned to deeper consciousness feel the tremors first. You are among these individuals. That is why everything feels increasingly unreal. You are not malfunctioning. You are evolving ahead of collective time. In ancient mysteries, initiates were led into dark chambers before dawn, where they underwent symbolic deaths, dismemberments, and dissolutions. These were not punishments. They were preparations for rebirth. Humanity now undergoes such an initiation on a global scale. The symbolic chamber is the inner psychic darkness you feel. The dismemberment is the cutting of your attachments. The dissolution is the collapse of meaning patterns that once sustained you. But here is the crucial truth. Only those who surrender to this inner process can cross the threshold intact. Those who cling to the old self will fracture. Those who cling to the old world will feel torn apart by its vanishing. Those who cling to old relationships will be dragged backward into patterns that cannot survive this era. This is why your soul is cutting cords relentlessly now. It prepares you for the great separation. It removes from your field everything that would hinder your crossing. It releases you from entanglements that would keep you bound to the dying archetypes of the old aeon. If you attempt to hold on, you will suffer. If you surrender, you will be carried. In my later visions, I saw the collective psyche splitting into two streams. One descended into chaos, fragmentation, and psychic regression. The other ascended into inner sovereignty, consciousness, and alignment with the self. The split was not moral, it was developmental. Some souls were prepared, others were not. This is the meaning of the time you live in. The great separation is not punishment, but differentiation. It is the sorting of those ready to embody the self from those who remain bound to the unconscious will of the collective. The final cord cutting is the mark of those who are ready. You may feel that everything familiar is dissolving. Yes, because the familiar belonged to the old structure. You may feel that people you once loved are drifting away. Yes, because their path remains tied to the old aeon. You may feel that inner pressure pushes you toward solitude. Yes, because solitude is where the self emerges. During these years, the unconscious behaves with unusual intensity. Dreams become prophetic. Symbols become alive. Synchronicities multiply. You may encounter repeating numbers, uncanny coincidences, sudden revelations. These are not delusions. They are the psyche's attempt to guide you through a transitional field where the rational mind cannot navigate alone. You may also encounter sudden insights into the lives of others. As if you can see behind their masks, this is not superiority. It is the awakening of inner vision. As the ego dissolves, the psyche opens. As the cords break, perception expands, and with this expanded perception comes a deeper understanding. You were never meant to carry everything you carried. You were never meant to remain attached to patterns that were never yours. You were never meant to live a life shaped by the expectations of a dying era. Now the illusions fall, now the truth approaches. The psychic collapse of 2025, 2026 is not an ending, but a metamorphosis. It strips the ego bare so that the self may emerge without obstruction. It prepares the inner vessel to receive a new archetypal configuration, a new worldview, a new psychic order, a new way of being human. But before the self rises, every attachment tied to the old self must be cut. The soul does this cutting with precision, and pain accompanies each incision. Do not resist it. Move through it with awareness. Know that each severing brings you closer to wholeness. The old world fades behind you now. The new one is not yet visible. This is the most dangerous and sacred moment in any transformation, the in-between, the liminal, the threshold. Stand here with courage, the self is near. And now, in this final movement of our long descent and rising, we arrive at the threshold where the old self has fallen silent and the new self begins to stir like a distant star behind the ribs. You have endured the shadowed corridors of separation. You have walked through the dissolving structures of identity, and you have felt the psychic ground beneath you shatter into dust. The cords that once bound you have loosened, snapped, or dissolved into the invisible. You stand now in the aftermath of endings so profound that language cannot yet articulate them. But endings are never empty. They clear space for the arrival of the self. The self does not descend like a storm. It does not announce itself with thunder or revelation. It appears quietly. The way dawn approaches, a sleepless traveler, soft and light, touching the edges of a landscape you thought had died, the ego expects transcendence to come as triumph, resurrection, clarity, but the self arrives first as peace. A strange, unfamiliar peace, not the peace of comfort, but the peace of alignment, a peace that asks for nothing, promises nothing, but simply reveals a truth so old you forgot it was yours. In this silence, in this vast interior clearing, something begins to arrange itself. I saw it many times in my later years, often in dreams, sometimes in waking reflections at Bollingen, where the stones and water spoke with quiet authority. The psyche, left without attachments and freed from its entanglements, begins instinctively to form a mandala. The mandala is the natural geometry of the self, the blueprint of your deepest order. You do not create it, it emerges. It rises from the depths like a memory from before your birth. In this final phase, when the cords are cut and the shadow is integrated, the mandala becomes the organizing principle of your existence. It draws fragments of your psyche into alignment. It centers your consciousness, and it orients your life toward an inner axis rather than the demands of the outer world. This is why so many who reach this stage no longer desire what they once pursued. Their desires were shaped by wounds, fears, and attachments, but now the self directs the energy of the psyche, and the self desires only authenticity. You may feel this as a sudden clarity, an inner knowing that does not explain itself, but simply states, this is the path. The world may not understand you. Former relationships may not follow. Old values may crumble, but the mandala within you holds steady. Its center does not move. It pulls you into the new aeon, not through effort, but through gravity. This is the secret few ever discover. Individuation is not a path you walk. It is a path that forms beneath your feet as you walk it. The self creates it with each step you take in truth. And now that the old cords have been severed, your steps are unburdened. They fall lightly, though the terrain may still feel unfamiliar. Many who come to this stage imagine that the great storms of transformation will continue without end, but storms are only the beginning. After the tempest has passed, you discover an unexpected stillness, a stillness that does not come from absence, but from presence. It is the presence of the self, which has been waiting for you behind every grief, every collapse, every shadowed mirror. It has waited not with urgency but with infinite patience, knowing that the psyche must traverse its labyrinths in its own time. And now here you stand before the mandala of your being, witnessing a new order arise from the ruins of the old. You may notice that your perception shifts subtly. Colors deepen, sounds stretch, silence expands. Time becomes less linear, more fluid. You move through the world with a slower rhythm, one that feels synchronized with something ancient beneath your thoughts. This is the rhythm of the self. It is not in conflict with life. It is life. As the self emerges, relationships change. You no longer seek validation, rescue, or emotional refuge from others. You relate from center, not from wound. You love without projecting your unmet needs. You see others not as extensions of your story, but as sovereign beings on their own path of becoming. Such love is quieter, deeper, freer. Your past no longer binds you. The memories remain, the experiences remain, but the psychic charge dissolves. What once pierced you heals. What once held you captive becomes a teaching. What once defined you becomes a chapter, not a destiny. This is the true meaning of the final cord cutting. It frees the ego from its compulsions so that consciousness may serve something greater than survival. It allows the self to rise unimpeded. As a mountain rises from geological upheaval, the earthquake was necessary. The mountain is the revelation. In this new landscape, the great separation takes on a different meaning. It is no longer simply the severing of attachments. It is the differentiation between those who live from the ego and those who live from the self. This differentiation is not hierarchical, it is directional. Some will continue the cycles of repetition, shadow projection, and unconscious suffering. Others, like you, will step into the clarity and stillness of the self. This is how the new aeon begins, not with global events, though they will reflect the inner shift, not with societal collapse or rebirth, though those too will come. The new aeon begins with individuals who have severed the final cords to their old selves and now walk as carriers of consciousness. They are not leaders in the conventional sense. They are centers of gravity. Their presence reorganizes the psychic field around them. You may not realize it yet, but your transformation influences the world in ways you cannot measure. Every attachment you release shifts the collective unconscious by a fraction. Every shadow you integrate reduces the burden humanity must carry. Every step you take toward the self becomes a lantern for others who still wander in darkness. Individuation is always personal, but its effects are universal. In these last years of my life, I understood something that eluded me in earlier decades. Humanity's evolution depends not on collective movements, but on the courage of solitary individuals who choose inner truth over outer conformity. The world changes when a single person becomes whole, and you, who have endured the fire of separation, are nearing that wholeness. The mandala forms, the center holds, the self breathes. Allow yourself now to deepen into this new orientation. You no longer need to seek. You no longer need to explain. The cord cutting is finished. The shadow has spoken. The ego has surrendered. What remains is the eternal within you. When you feel lost, remember the center. When you feel doubt, return to the breath. When you feel overwhelmed, place your awareness in the mandala that quietly forms itself in the depths of your being. It is not a symbol alone, it is the architecture of your destiny. As the final words of this long discourse gather themselves, I tell you this: the life ahead of you will not resemble the life behind you. The person you were is gone. A new one emerges, not constructed, not chosen, but revealed. This revelation is the gift of the great separation. Walk now with the dignity of one who has crossed a threshold few ever reach. Walk not with pride, but with presence. Walk not with fear, but with awareness. Walk not with attachment, but with clarity. The self is your guide now. The mandala is your map. The soul is your true home. You are free.